fourth term there. He has gotten a pretty fierce challenge from Trump-backed former car dealer Bernie Moreno. So we'll see how that pans out. But one of the things, just zooming out a little bit, a lot of these Senate races have gotten a lot closer in recent weeks. Democrats who felt somewhat comfortable as we've gotten closer to Election Day have seen that margin really narrow. And again, this brings us back to this discussion of split ticket voters. In 1988, 17 states had different people vote for president versus Senate. That was down to one state last year, the state of Maine, with Susan Collins would, but the state went for Joe Biden. So we'll have to watch that very closely. But again, we're expecting that result out of the president.
Ticket splitting has become more rare in the Trump era. However, it's making a comeback in some of these Senate races where people might vote for a different party for president than they do for the Senate.
That's one of the things we'll watch.
And Hallie, you doing some more exit duty on North Carolina.
That's right. So now that North Carolina polls have closed, I want to talk you through some of what we're seeing from these exit polls numbers. And it is interesting, right? First, we're going to take a look at the non-white vote in North Carolina. These are the black voters and Latino voters that Tom was talking about in some of those key counties in North Carolina. As expected, Vice President Harris is winning non-white voters based on these early exit poll numbers. But take a look at Donald Trump here. He's got that 25% slice of the pie. Let me show you the comparison. He is outperforming where he was 4 years ago with non-white voters in North Carolina. He was at 19% in 2020. However, two things are also true here. Let me show you white voters here, and we can take a look at the comparison here. You can see that it is former President Trump winning with white voters at 61%, Kamala Harris at 39%. But again, take a look at the comparisons to 2020. She is actually outperforming where President Biden was back in 2020. She is doing better with white voters in North Carolina. So you might look at that and you might go, as we take a walk back to the desk here, you might go, okay, well, those two things, do they balance out? Not really, because white voters make up a larger share of the electorate in North Carolina than non-white voters. So she might be willing to make that trade, essentially.
All right. Thanks. I want to go back over to Tom. Tom, you've got some more information in Florida, but before you get into that, just to be clear, there's 2 poll closing times in the state of Florida.
Yeah, it's what we call a split poll closing. So on the eastern portion of the state, we have data coming in because the polls have closed there.
During commercial breaks, I'll take
some of the further parts of the panhandle, they haven't closed just yet, so we won't be giving you that data just yet. We'll probably wait another 30 minutes. I want to show you something that's somewhat surprising. It may surprise you if you watch presidential elections and you follow election nights like this one. So Donald Trump right now, with 73% of the vote in, is up 55% in Miami-Dade County. Again, this is where Democrats find their votes in the state of Florida. Biden won Miami-Dade County by 53. They've now flipped those numbers. This is pretty astonishing when you think where Hillary Clinton was in 2016, 63%, 53. Now tonight, 55. Again, there's still 73% of the vote left. This shouldn't be a complete shocker because Governor Ron DeSantis won Miami-Dade 2 years ago by about 11 points, which was a surprise at the time. But this shows how Republicans are expanding the map and how Florida is becoming more and more red. I do want to show you some potential good news, possibly for the Harris campaign if they're watching tonight. So we're watching some of the vote come in Georgia. Remember, I told you more than 50% of the vote from Georgia is going to come around the Atlanta metro region. Let's take a look at some of these counties around Atlanta. 74% in Douglas County. Look at her number, 65%. Biden was at 61. So this means she's overperforming in the exact counties where she needs to find those votes. County here.
Okay, so this
right
is
now
the current
we don't have any vote just yet in.
About,
Rockdale County, this is another big one.
I don't know if this thing's fully updated because I believe
at 69. So she's overperforming right now in some of these counties in the Atlanta metro region. Again, guys, this is where she has to drive up her vote. If she can expand the map and steal the Democratic vote there, they can hold Georgia. Remember, this was such a close race 4 years ago. Any votes they can find in that Atlanta region is going to help them, guys.
All right, Tom, thank you so much. We've got guests over at our insiders desk today, and we also want to ask them what they're thinking of some of these early returns. We're starting to see some things come out. We've got Cornell Belcher, we've got Mark Lauder. Cornell, I'll ask you what you think about what Tom just talked about. You had the story in Miami-Dade where it's potentially a big victory in that county, signs perhaps that outreach to the Hispanic vote is working for Donald Trump. And yet in Georgia, you're starting to see some of that suburban vote really being ramped up for Kamala Harris.
No, I think that's right. Look, Florida is I think Democrats are going to look back at how we've not invested in Florida. Since the campaign I worked on, the Obama campaign, we've not invested in work Florida well. And Florida's like a country. It's really
all right.
big,
In the opening, I impersonated
we've
Donald
taken
Trump. Do you guys want to hear me
like
impersonate
states
Kamala
like
Harris, or would
Georgia,
that be
and
too
North
offensive
Carolina,
for
where you
you
see
two?
a sort of a difference. But Florida,
Probably lean
is a
towards the
state
latter. Probably too
that
offensive.
Democrats did not invest a lot of
But
money in, did not run a lot of
you're my
advertising
Trump
in,
impression.
and it shows.
Let me bring in Mark Lauder, Director of Strategic Communications in the Trump 2020 re-election campaign, former spokesperson for Vice President Pence. Mark, give us your view as we wait for a call in North Carolina. What is the Harris camp right now thinking?
Right now, they're looking at turnout. I think it really, for both sides, it's going to be all about turnout. Do you get your voters out? I've seen some, I've heard anecdotally from some of my colleagues on the campaign that turnout is not where it needs to be in the urban areas for Kamala Harris. It's overperforming in some of the rural areas, including the hurricane impacted areas. So I think that's a good sign for President Trump, but we're going to have to see how that plays out. Another thing I'm watching, and I know Tom alluded to it with Miami-Dade, but I also looked at Hillsborough County, Tampa Bay in Florida. It was both Hillary and Biden, both a +7. Right now, it's only Kamala +1.
And Hillary Clinton actually did some campaigning there for this particular election as well. Mark and Cornell, thank you. We'll be back early and often as we go along here.
And we will take a break here. I think we're going to come back with more on the make or break state of Pennsylvania as the polls get ready to close there.
All right, I'm gonna mute the commercials, so you guys can throw in all your questions. You guys can throw in questions whether they're related to the election or not. But yeah, I'm gonna keep refreshing that thing as we go along, so that way you guys can like see what's happening with the election. So yeah. All right, thanks for coming in for a short time. Am I even gonna be able to continue going for 9 o'clock, because like no one's here right now. There's only one person here, so like oh yeah, actually I tried sending the link, it wouldn't come in, so yeah, I don't know if I can actually let people join this. Like I would have to like accept the link, but I don't know if it actually is going to do that. Yeah, I can't do this all night, because like, one, I'll lose people, and two, like I'll become more sleepy than Joe Biden, so that won't be fun. Yeah, tonight's gonna be a fun night. We're gonna talk about everything that's happening at the election, and we're trying to make it entertaining. We're not gonna make it boring. Oh, all right. When we're back, I'm going to unmute the TV. Oh, we're back.
Right now, the polls closed there. But how important is that to either candidate in terms of making their path to 270 easier or tougher?
Yeah, let's start with former President Trump, because he really needs to hold North Carolina. It was the only battleground state he won in 2020. So let's give him North Carolina. If he holds North Carolina, he flips Georgia and Pennsylvania, he gets to 270. That's his easiest path. But Lester, if he can't win North Carolina, his whole map changes. And why do I say that? Because he can no longer win just 3 states. He has to win 4. He can do it by winning Pennsylvania and Georgia, and keeping the blue wall, or I should say, tearing down the blue wall, Michigan and Wisconsin. If he can't go there, he has to go out west and win both Nevada and Arizona. That puts him over the top. But again, without North Carolina, for his scenario, he needs 4 states.
Harris has put a lot of money and time and people on the ground in North Carolina. What does it do for her?
Well, look, if she wins these 16 electoral votes, it eases some pressure off her, right? Because her easiest path is the blue wall. If she can win Pennsylvania and North Carolina, look how close she is. She only needs 9 more electoral votes. Pretty much any other state, with the exception of Nevada, gets her there if she's able to win there. So if she can take North Carolina, the Trump team gets much more nervous, and the Democrats become much more optimistic because she's won out east. If she can win in the Midwest and pick off a state out west or hold it, she's going to be president.
All right, now let's go back to
these are like very
about the blue wall. Wisconsin is a big part of it, and our correspondent Shaquille Brewster is in Milwaukee with some breaking news, and it's a possible issue with absentee ballot.
We won't find this out until like tomorrow, probably, maybe even Thursday.
Hi there, Savannah. I want to start with what we're seeing at these polling locations, because the locations are open for about another hour. I want to let you go inside. I can't go inside and report, so I'll let our camera go inside there now, where we've seen a steady flow of people. At this location, there was a line that went on for more than an hour this morning. You see things have slowed down a bit. The reports from around the state is that the vote process is going smoothly, but where we are seeing hiccups is with the vote counting. We just learned from the clerk in Milwaukee downtown, where they are counting all of the absentee ballots and early votes at once, that the city of Milwaukee had to restart the processing or counting of those absentee ballots. They say an observer saw that while the ballot tabulators were sealed, the door wasn't properly closed on them. And after going through with the bipartisan team and making sure that nothing was tampered with, the city, out of an abundance of caution, decided to restart counting all of those absentee ballots. What this means is that as we expect results from this battleground state of Wisconsin, you're going to have to wait a little bit longer. The clerk said in the past that they weren't expecting results from this city to come until after midnight Central Time. We now believe that timeline has shifted 2 to 3 hours later into the night. There's more than 100,000 ballots that those clerks are going to have to work through. So the vote is still ongoing right now, but be prepared to wait as those results come in later tonight, guys.
All right, Shaq Brewster in Milwaukee. We're used to waiting for Milwaukee into the wee hours of the night. Let's go back to the table here. Hallie, you've been looking at some of the exit polls. I think you've got some North Carolina information and some interesting results.
So there's some conventional wisdom here, and then there's some data that flips the conventional wisdom on its head. So let's talk about that specifically as it relates to these age groups. We know, right, the Biden coalition in 2020 that propelled him to the White House involved young voters, right? And for our purposes, young is 18 to 29 in North Carolina. And I want to show you here, you can see that for older voters, and I'm talking senior vote here, former President Trump won those older voters. That is not unexpected. His campaign has long thought that he would do well with seniors. But here's what's interesting. Look at Vice President Harris. She's got 47% of the senior vote. She's doing better than President Biden did with seniors in 2020 in North Carolina. So she is outperforming where he was 4 years ago. Then you look at that youth vote, right? Again, not unexpected that Vice President Harris would have a slight lead. And I would say this is very close. We are waiting for more numbers to come in, more of these waves as they're called from the exit polls, but still interesting. But again, look at 48% for former President Trump. He is outperforming among young voters in North Carolina. So you have that kind of conventional wisdom. They're overall sort of winning the groups, at least to a degree that we thought they'd win. But each of them are overperforming on the sort of flip end of that.
All right, well, Savannah Sellers is here to talk about a huge role that the youth vote could play in the outcome of this election. What have you been seeing? You've been tracking a lot of the polls leading up to tonight.
Yeah, I absolutely have. And first, I want to dig in a little further on North Carolina and what Hallie just said, because if we dig even deeper in and we talk about gender under 30, it's similar to the trends that we've been discussing. Trump has improved what he did with young men. Tonight, 60% in our NBC News exit poll there say they support him. That is up from 42% that voted for him in 2020. Whereas with Harris, she's performing even better than Biden did with women. 65% saying that they support Harris in this exit poll, when 58% actually support
North Carolina, or is that
that's just North Carolina. That's our North Carolina exit poll tonight. North Carolina is really interesting to me because I've been talking with college Democrat and Republican presidents on campuses there, but the college Democrats were so organized in this state. Like, what they did on these campuses was really amazing. They lobbied the state to have more polling places on campuses. They even had it be made that the student ID could be an acceptable form of ID on several campuses, which was not the case prior. We're also seeing this kind of play out to be right what we're seeing with that young men appeal for Trump seems to be working in some places. I'm interested to see if that continues throughout the night. We heard Gotti mention like those podcast appearances earlier in the night, Joe Rogan, Logan Paul, things like that. This seems to be where he is gaining that ground. I'm interested to see if it continues in other battlegrounds.
And just underscoring how important the young vote is, the Harris campaign tonight touting the fact that they have Paul Rudd, for example, out trying to energize college voters in Pennsylvania. Jennifer Garner as well.
Keep them in line.
Stay in line.
Mark Cuban is FaceTiming voters in a 4-hour line at UNC Chapel Hill right now.
It speaks to how close this race continues to be as these results come in. On the other hand, you have the Trump campaign saying, hey, we're seeing good turnout in Philadelphia, yes, in the Trump areas. We'll have to see how that actually bears out when we start to get results in Philadelphia. But it does speak to the fact that there's a real focus on this epicenter and on young voters.
And when we talk about young men in particular, and to the point that you're making here at the table, that the Trump campaign has really looked to turn those young men out, they're not typically the people who show up to the ballot box every 4 years. They're what's called those low propensity voters we've been talking about. I will tell you that the Trump campaign feels like they've been doing a pretty good job trying to turn those, not always voters into voters at least this cycle, because for them, that's one of the big keys. If they can get this demographic out to the ballot box to actually show up, whether that was early or whether that's now, they're feeling like they're going to have some wind at their back.
It's, you take a step back, the story of this election is the gender gap. It's the battle of the sexes election, and whether you want to say it's young men or senior women, or it's men and women. If Trump turns out more men, he wins. If Kamala Harris turns out more women, she does. It's kind of as simple as that.
No doubt about it. And what's so fascinating is that the Trump campaign tried this sort of unusual, unconventional tactic to get out the vote, which was to outsource it to Elon Musk, to other outside groups. And they were quite bullish heading into tonight, saying, look, we feel good about this decision.
And remember, the Harris campaign was concerned about black men as well. And they brought in President Obama to make the case. Any evidence right now how that appeal has translated into votes today?
Well, that's one of the things that she has talked about on the campaign trail. I sat down with the vice president not too long ago, and she feels like she needed to earn every single one of those black male votes just as much as Joe Biden would. That's why you saw her. We talked about podcasts, doing like an NBA podcast, a football podcast. Sure, she did Call Her Daddy to try to reach out to those young women. That's the name of course, that very popular podcast with women. But she also was trying to extend an olive branch to men. I would just say this. Two things are true. Right, Kamala Harris. Let me say it this way: Donald Trump is doing better with men based on public polling right now than Kamala Harris is doing with women. That gap exists. But also remember that historically, women have turned out more than men in every election dating back to 2018. And so that is going to be one of the big key factors.
I'm going to try to stay as politically neutral as possible if something like comes up. Then something comes up, but for now, I'm going to try my best.
Closings at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, including the one that everybody's been watching, Pennsylvania. And we'll be right back.
Most of my social media is like not on this. Most of my social media is like not for my viewers to see. Like my Snapchat and Instagram is like mainly for people who might be like closer, like my family and friends, not really for random strangers on YouTube, but like stuff like Letterboxd and
when you experience Europe on a Viking longship,
like,
you'll spend less time getting there.
And also TikTok mainly for family and friends, but like
Viking.
I don't really post a lot on social media, so if you guys like didn't follow me,
United Healthcare knows you've got your whole life ahead of you.
Yeah. Is that John Stewart?
Nice to know you're free to focus
No,
on
that's just some random
with
grandpa
reliable
in
Medicare coverage
United
from
Healthcare
United
commercial.
Come
X
with
is
us.
the cancer of the earth, so definitely is. Or Twitter, yeah, Twitter. You know how Twitter. I'm not getting
Inspired.
but yeah, Twitter's like the cancer of the earth, so like, opposite for Instagram.
Expecting chanting and delicious things. Harry Potter, Wizards of Bacon, on Food Network and Stream on Max.
Mornings are full of possibility
The thing is, I'm
energy.
just
And how you get
recording
set
on my
for the day
phone,
ahead
so I can't
matters.
check that
It's
stuff.
about getting caught up and getting ahead, because every day deserves the best start.
What does it take to face cancer with
I
confidence?
have Instagram, but that's
It
I'm not
takes an
sharing that
expert team
account
that knows your
to the
cancer
public.
down to the molecule.
The
And
only
make
reason
sure
why I
you
have
understand
X
every
is,
detail.
or Twitter, I'm
It
gonna call it
takes
Twitter, I'm
MSK.
not calling it X, even though I did accidentally, but like,
Face it, Broadway's
I only
most
have it to
relevant,
like look at what
insightful,
other
very
accounts are
funny
posting.
play
Like,
is
I don't post anything on Twitter.
Yellowface. Daniel Day Kim is exceptionally good in this New York Times Critics' Pick. Variety raves it might be David Henry Wallen's magnum opus with crackerjack direction by Lee Silverman and a wonderfully inventive cast. Don't miss it. Yellowface on Broadway through November 24th only.
Get early access to Black Friday deals
You
now
guys
at
wanna hear
PC
me
Richard
do,
& Son. Save up to 40% on Samsung and LG OLED TVs.
In the beginning of this live stream, I did a Trump impression, where
Plus
I
free next day
talked about how
delivery
they're eating
and
the
free
dogs.
wall installation. Save up to 38% on Google
Introduction
Smart
as
TVs
Donald
starting
Trump.
at
But do you
$197.
want to
No
hear me
need
do
to
a
wait for
Kamala
Black Friday.
Harris
These
impression?
prices are guaranteed through
Kathleen
Christmas.
Kamala
Early
impression.
access to Black Friday deals now
Want me
at
to do
PC
Kamala
Richard
Harris
& Son.
impression?
This
My
celebration,
Kamala Harris impression is not very good, but like,
first ever city school
it's not as
football
good
tie
as
is a
my
moment
Trump,
Aiden's
but
spark
yeah.
keeps reliving. It was amazing, you know. 1 year later, Aiden is a senior and a captain. He received the most votes of all of our kids for a captain. For a reason, you know, people recognize it, they see it. His Hayes teammates know. At linebacker, Aiden lights his spark. He brings passion, energy, ferociousness, all the good things that you look for in a linebacker. He's got the IQ to match it.
We didn't lose, they rigged the election to go to Sleepy Joe's favor. But in reality, I won the election because I'm a better candidate. And I had all my supporters storm over to the Capitol.
It takes MSK.
And that day was just so incredibly peaceful, it was crazy.
Welcome back to our live election night coverage. We're coming up on the 8 o'clock hour here in the East. You are looking at vote counting centers across the country in this historic election.
Some polls have closed and some places closing.
They are indeed. We're about 6 minutes to the next poll closing, where we'll get our first look at the real vote count from the biggest battleground of all, Pennsylvania, which we've been talking about. States has been moving quickly.
We are moments away from the polls closing in 16 states and the District of Columbia.
171 electoral votes up for grabs in the biggest haul of the night. Florida, with its 30 electoral votes, could be one of the first big calls of the evening.
And we'll get our first results from what may be the most important prize this election, Pennsylvania.
We love
Pennsylvania can go either way.
Good to be back in Pennsylvania. The race could all come down to the Keystone State.
Pennsylvania is extremely crucial.
If Vice President Harris loses this state,
Pennsylvania, it all comes down to this.
her path to 270 narrows significantly.
We're going to win Pennsylvania.
So, Pennsylvania, are you ready to make your voices heard?
We're standing by for the first
We are
vote
going to win Pennsylvania in a
this critical
landslide.
battleground as our decision desk gets ready to make new calls on the road to 270. All right, getting ready for Pennsylvania. NBC's Stephanie Gosk is in Philadelphia. Stephanie, this is where the Harris campaign really needs to ramp up those turnout numbers. What are you seeing?
Yeah, they really do. Well, it's calming down here in Northeast Philadelphia. This is kind of a working class, diverse community. People still getting in under the wire in these last few minutes. But the big question, Savannah, afterwards is how long is it going to take to call the state of Pennsylvania 4 years ago,
Maybe
it took
during a
until
commercial
Saturday.
break.
I was on the phone with the former
See, like,
Secretary of the Commonwealth talking about the challenges they faced back then. 2.6 million mail-in ballots. That was what slowed the process down. And it was a new process for people in this state. 4 years later, they haven't changed the laws, but things are a bit better. There are fewer mail-in ballots, just under 2 million. They have new machines to process them and more people. But the optimistic outlook from election officials we have spoken to is that the majority of those mail-in ballots won't be fully processed until Wednesday night into Thursday morning. And if this race is as tight as it was 4 years ago, when Joe Biden won by about 80,000 votes, those mail-in ballots will be crucial to make the call here. So we're still talking days, Savannah.
Yeah, and in some of these big jurisdictions like Philadelphia, Stephanie, now they have election workers who are prepared to work all night and count all night.
Back.
So it goes a little bit quicker. We'll check back with you a bunch. We have got Tom Yamas over at the big board, and you're still getting vote in from Georgia and North Carolina, two big pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, and I want to talk about Georgia right now because North Carolina, there's still only about 2% of votes in. Let's look at Georgia because I think what is happening here when we talk about Kamala Harris and her chances, she's overperforming Biden in some of these counties around the Atlanta metro area. I'm going to move the map over this way because I'm going to bounce around. Here on this side, the right side, this is where Biden was at 2020. Here's where Harris is tonight, 76% in. You can see she's overperforming there. We come to Southern County, Clayton County, against the suburbs of Atlanta, those ring counties around Atlanta.
So right here, Trump's ahead. He has 20 more electoral votes than Harris does.
We move over to Rockdale. Look at this.
He has won Indiana, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Kamala Harris has won Vermont. She's leaning in Ohio. Oh, she's leading in Ohio.
But they're looking at these numbers tonight and
She's also leading in New Hampshire, Virginia, and North Carolina, which is also
only 25% of the vote is in. Trump is way on top.
Ohio is not a swing state,
25% of the vote is in. Remember, we can show you guys where the vote is out. These giant bubbles.
Leading in Florida, Georgia,
that's how many
South
votes
Carolina.
still have to be counted. So you can see a lot of the rural counties. A lot of them are coming in. There's still some in the rural county that are out, but the big area, remember, 50% of the vote is going to come around the Atlanta metro region. Let's also talk about Pennsylvania, guys, because we're getting close to getting some information in Pennsylvania. And remember, this 2020, Joe Biden wins the state. It is going to be the keystone state and the key to the election tonight. Trump won it in 2016. The difference, about 40,000 votes. In 2020, he wins by about 80,000 votes. Biden does. The interesting that has happened, and we've learned a lot about Philadelphia, the counties around Philadelphia, places like Chester, places like Montgomery County. Those people in the know call it Monco. We'll talk to Hallie about that, as well as as well. Delaware County, Delco, and Philadelphia County. This area right here, this makes up about 30% of the vote for Pennsylvania. We're going to be watching what happens here. What's interesting that happened here in 2020, so Biden actually underperformed Clinton, but he overperformed in those suburbs. So we'll be watching what happens there. You also have these swing counties here, the Lehigh Valley, Monroe County, part of the Poconos, Northampton, and Lehigh. Lots of Hispanics there. We're going to see what happens. And we're so honored to have both Kristen and Hallie. People who know about Wawa. They know about Hispanics. They know about steaks. Come on. How good is Wawa?
Phillies.
Always the best.
Always. But Tom, you forgot to ask them cheesesteaks, wit or wit out?
Wit.
Okay.
Whiz wit out, babe.
Okay.
Whiz wit out.
All right. Well, we have a lot of time just to do Philly talk. We won't leave Pittsburgh out, but we got coming up on a poll close.
Yeah,
here.
21 seconds until the top of the hour. Another poll close, and we're going to hear from about 17 states here coming up at the top of the hour. There's our election alert as we stand by, and the drama building now.
All right, it is 8 o'clock.
We're going to see Pennsylvania.
Various
states, other states that
are going to have their polls
closing
right now.
In about 1 second, and we'll be able to get some characterizations for you here in just a moment. We'll look at 8 o'clock poll closings. Here's an NBC News projection. State of Florida, NBC News projection.
All right, Trump's predicted to get Florida
and take its 30 electoral votes. The state of Massachusetts, Kamala Harris, the projected winner tonight with 11 electoral votes.
Tennessee,
Donald Trump, the projected winner in Tennessee tonight. 11 electoral votes there. In the state of Maryland, NBC News projects that will go in the Kamala Harris column. We move on to the state of Missouri. NBC News projects that Donald Trump is the victor in Missouri when all the votes are counted. Here's what Alabama looks like. That will also go to Donald Trump. State of Oklahoma will be projected to go to Donald Trump. And in D.C., District of Columbia, 3 electoral votes at stake. NBC News projects that Kamala Harris will win there. So where does it leave us now? On the road to 270? There it is, 90 for Trump right now, 27 for Harris, 270, of course, the magic number and the keys to the White House.
Well, we await calls in those all-important battlegrounds, and there are still outstanding states.
That was a big wave. That was a big wave.
We will wait for New Jersey, Illinois, Connecticut, and, of course, Pennsylvania as well. Let's show you what we can right now in Pennsylvania. No surprise here. It is too early to call. North Carolina, same story. They do count fast there, but not fast enough to call it. It's still too early to call. Just 5% of the vote in. And in Georgia, we're seeing a lot more of the vote, but still too early to make a projection. Let's go to Tom, who's starting to look at some of the numbers here. And I see you've got Virginia up there, which is a potential bellwether, something that might give us some indication about how this night might go.
And it's a state that we can look at.
They just went through a lot of stuff. That was
across the country. I know a lot of you guys know the D.C. area very well. 30% of the vote is going to come from these northern suburbs. It's a good barometer to know also how Harris is doing with suburban women. So let's go to 2020 to compare here. So Prince William County, it looks like Harris is slightly down with 75% of the vote in.
No, it's very close.
Stood out to me. 95% of the vote is in Loudoun County right now. Biden was at 61%. Harris is now at 56%. Again, there's a difference about 35,000 votes. 95% is in, and we can actually see how much of the vote is left. Only about 3,600 votes remain in Loudoun County. So she's underperforming a little bit there. As we keep going here, Fairfax County, 45% in. She's at 68%. Let's see how Biden was doing there. 69, about the same. Something else that's interesting that's happening in Virginia Beach. This is a swing county. Trump won in 2016. Biden was able to flip it. Tonight, Trump is on top, but only about 20% of the vote is in. A lot of the western part of the state, as we know, is going to be more rural. Some of that coal mining country, it's going to resemble West Virginia. We have some of the vote in a county like over here, Wise County. This is a Trump barometer. He's at 78%. He was at 80%
if Trump lost
in 2020.
Texas, that would
41% of the vote is out.
bad
He's underperforming slightly. I guess the thing that sticks out to me, which it's too early to know if it's a red flag, but Loudoun County, again, this is a place where Democrats want to run up those votes in Virginia. Not that Virginia is in danger for Democrats because they were able to run up the score in 2020. But Trump in 2016 got close. He got within 5 points. A number like this, it's going to worry them a little bit. But I know you guys know much more about that area than I do.
Well, actually, we're honored to have a resident of the Commonwealth of Virginia with us, Chuck Todd. So, I mean, you look at that, you know those suburban collar counties around Washington, D.C. very well. Is that a warning light if Kamala Harris is not performing as well as Biden did in some of those suburban, exurban counties?
It could be if we're going to see that if it's moving. Virginia is sort of the gateway now to the north rather than being, I always joke, it's sort of seceded from the Confederacy, right? It is the one southern state that has been consistently a Democratic state, not even a swing state anymore. So if that is consistent,
I'm still behind with
one thing I've learned though with the Northern Virginia vote, you may have 95% of the vote in, that 5% can account for a lot more uncounted vote than people realize. So, and there is a sense, so that's a wait and see. Look, the bigger thing that I've taken away so far is we've been in the middle of a political realignment for a decade, and every one of these presidential elections, we're like, hey, look at this. The fact of the matter is Donald Trump's makeup of his electorate this time is much different than it was in 2016 or 2020. And I think we're seeing it both break on ethnicity and geographically. So it looks like that Donald Trump's going to be stronger in the Southeast. Why? Because he is doing better with Hispanics.
That's right.
And there is a larger population of Hispanics in the Southeast and the Southwest than any other part of this country.
Yeah, I know
Hispanics
are
going to do better with
shifting over to
I've been
Trump.
messing around with Indiana.
But they're like...
Indiana's not going to... It's a red state. Donald Trump's underperforming about a point or two in almost, even in the rural counties. Indiana's a very white state. That's a tea leaf. Yeah, I just throw it out there. It's a tea leaf. They obviously border
where those voters go.
No, that she's performing a couple of points better. So clearly there are some older whites, and we could really see this country divided by regions where she's stronger in the north because she's improving with white voters, and he's stronger in the south because he's improving with voters of color, in particular Hispanic voters. We're not seeing as much evidence among African American voters, but definitely Hispanic voters. It's not just Florida. I think Georgia, we're seeing it as well.
Well, we're seeing it nationally too. When you look at some of the numbers here, he is plus 10 specifically with Latino men, according to our exit poll nationally, a demographic group that Joe Biden was plus 23 with 4 years ago. So it is definitely a shift, and it is definitely one of the headlines that we're watching as we're seeing these exit polls come in.
And we see that, I mean, the Latino vote is not just concentrated in the Southwest.
That's exactly right.
It's not just the Southeast. It's also in Pennsylvania. There's a huge Latino population in Pennsylvania.
We have been talking about the ground game quite a bit. It's been heavily focused in Pennsylvania on trying to energize Latinos on both sides. Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump really focusing on that in places like Allentown, in places like Reading, Pennsylvania, trying to make sure that they are getting them out to vote and flipping them if necessary.
And let's not forget Kamala Harris wrapped up her campaign last night in Philadelphia, showing once again, demonstrating the importance of that state, as we are going to find out here in the hours to come and perhaps days.
And Hallie, you've got some more from your exit polls.
You know, it's interesting. Chuck's talking about the graceful removal from the chair. Thank you all for bearing with me. Chuck's talking about the realignment here and where people are sort of politically. One of the things we're watching on that front is this idea of independent voters. We know that they are going to be potentially a crucial voting bloc here. Vice President Harris had made overtures to this group in the closing weeks of her campaign, really trying to win them over, to get them over to her side. Look at how they're breaking nationally here. She is winning independent voters nationally, 51%, Donald Trump, 44%. Here's the thing. Nationally is not how you win or lose the White House. You win the White House in the battleground states. And look at the state of states, Pennsylvania, right? The most key battleground this year. In Pennsylvania, it's the opposite. It's former President Trump who is actually leading with independents over Vice President Harris in this really important state where the margins could be really close here. You can see it here. He's at 50%. She's at 44%. Again, that's in Pennsylvania. So you might ask, okay, well, how does that compare to how he did 4 years ago? He is overperforming generally with independents now in Pennsylvania. You see in 2020, 44%. He's doing a bit better now in 2024, 50%. And Savannah, Lester, Chuck, Chris, and I'll toss it back to you at the table. This could be really interesting as we watch this develop throughout the course of the night, not just in Pennsylvania, but in some of these other key battlegrounds as well, like Michigan and Wisconsin.
Actually, I think Chuck wanted to weigh in.
No, I just think we are seeing something else happen, which is you have a country that's really sour about our politics, sour about the direction of the country, and we now have fewer people identifying with the two major parties, according to our exit poll. It's a huge development. Independents are the fastest growing flock. Now, it's very rational. If you don't like the direction of the country, you don't like what's happening, and you think there's a threat to democracy, do you have a lot of faith in the two major parties? But the lowest share of major party people identifying with the two major parties in at least 4 elections, it means these independent votes are going to be the whole ballgame. They're going to decide who's president.
We are keeping a sharp eye on the state of Georgia. We can show you where things stand. We just had a change of characterization here. Our characterization from the decision desk now is that this is too close to call. You can see about a 267,000 vote difference between the two, 37% of the vote in. But again, the NBC News characterization at this point, too close to call in Georgia.
We've got a lot of contributors lined up to talk to you tonight. We've got Senator Claire McCaskill, I believe, over at our insider's desk. And Senator, I wondered what you thought about that. Was summer seeing as something of an alarm bell? This Loudoun County, suburban Washington, D.C., northern Virginia, where it seems that Kamala Harris is underperforming. And as you well know, the suburbs in the battleground states are key to her victory.
Yeah, listen, this is the witching hour. You know, this is when it is very early. We have exit polls. And by the way, if exit polls were correct, I would be governor and John Kerry would have been president and Hillary Clinton would have been president. So I think we've got to take all of that with a big giant grain of salt and wait for the actual numbers to come in. Because as we all know, these come in from different places. Typically rural places come in before urban locations. So I think she's going to be fine in the suburbs. I think, and I don't think the exit polls will actually reflect accurately what will happen with independent voters. I'm not saying she's going to dominate independent voters, but I'll be very surprised if there aren't a whole lot of women that call themselves independents that don't vote for Donald Trump.
At what point in all this do you begin to let out a sigh of relief here?
Well, listen, I think depending on what happens in Georgia and North Carolina, if by any chance she wins those 2 states, then I can breathe again. If she does not, then obviously Pennsylvania becomes even bigger. And let's don't sleep on Nevada. I think that may be the closest margin in this race. I think it may be literally maybe 500 to 2,000 votes separating the 2 candidates. I think it's that close in Nevada.
Well, we're waiting polls close there in less than an hour. Nevada and Arizona, those big western battlegrounds, but we do not expect results there, frankly, for days. So I guess Senator McCaskill is going to be holding her breath for a very, very long time. We've got Sarah Fagan here, too, a veteran of Republican campaigns. And again, with all the caveats, we are reading tea leaves right now, Sarah. What are you looking at? What are you noticing? And how do you see this shaking out?
So if you look at Florida, you look at Virginia, Donald Trump is running about 4 points better than he did in 2020. But then contrast Georgia and North Carolina, where I should caveat that less of the vote is in. He's running 1 point ahead in Georgia. He's running a little behind in North Carolina, where he did in 2020. And that says to me, perhaps, that the Harris GOTV effort is quite strong, that she's pulling her votes out in places where the campaign organized. So she's holding that margin closer.
And the GOTV, for those of you just joining us on Political Nerd Fest, get out the vote, the ground game, when we're talking about it. You know, this is about when you say, you pull the bus up and you say, let's go, we're going to hold you by the hand and take you to the polls. And organizing is the key to any successful campaign.
Absolutely. And you have the Harris campaign touting the fact that, for example, they knocked on 3 million doors over the weekends. It winds up being numbers, though, until people actually go to the polls and vote. And I do think, just bouncing off something that Chuck said earlier, it's just to zoom out for a moment. Remember that one of the biggest issues of this campaign was change. What people really want is change. And so what you saw in both of their closing arguments was an attempt to argue they're the change candidate. And so what we are seeing, for example, with independents, I think is notable, because I think the person who winds up winning this race will be the person who ultimately voters say, that's the change candidate.
And like everything in this election year, it's complicated because you have a former president, so there's a certain incumbency there, and a sitting vice president, and there's certain incumbency there as well.
There's something baked into Donald Trump's call for a change here, because he was already in the White House for 4 years. Same thing for Vice President Harris, as you're looking at the popularity or favorability rating for President Biden, which is low. And so the question, is that going to be a drag on how she does? To your point on the get out the vote effort, this is why early vote was critical for both of these campaigns, with some 79 million people voting early. Better to bank those votes. What if somebody gets sick? What if somebody's kid has to stay out of school or whatever? Get those votes in now to get them locked and loaded.
Let me just change the conversation just for a moment. We do have another call to make, and it's an NBC News projection in the state of South Carolina. South Carolina will go to Donald Trump when all the votes are counted later. And here's where the breakdown right now that Donald Trump, again, the projected winner, 24% of the vote in there, vote difference of about 104,000. But again, Donald Trump will pick up South Carolina. Here's where it leaves us on the road to 270. Donald Trump out in front with 99. Kamala Harris, 27.
We've got a few key battlegrounds where polls have closed. They're counting, but we don't have results yet. Still either too early to call or too close to call. Let's go to NBC's Garrett Haake. He's at Trump headquarters in West Palm Beach, Florida, Mar-a-Lago. Tell us what the campaign is saying to you.
Well, Savannah, what seems to be calming nerves down the street at Mar-a-Lago is what they're seeing out of Georgia right now, a state you were just discussing, where their key to victory was essentially blowing the doors off in rural turnout and improving their margins among minority voters, Latino voters, black voters. The campaign is seeing, in the same exit polls we're looking at, improvement among black voters, particularly black men, who the Trump campaign has spent heavily for months and months and months to try to win over even just a few percentage points, the kind of thing that could make a difference in a state decided by fewer than 12,000 votes 4 years ago. The other thing that I think has accrued to Trump's favor in Georgia is the resumption of unity among Georgia Republicans. Remember, there was a huge fallout with Brian Kemp, the popular Republican governor there, after 2020. Trump and Kemp made amends, although they rarely appeared together on the campaign trail. The two singing from the same hymnal in the race's closing weeks, along with a lot of these other Trump candidates, could be helpful to Trump in that state.
All right, Garrett, we have a call to make. This is North Carolina. The governor's race there. Josh Stein, the Democrat, takes the race there. He faced off against Governor Mark Robinson, a very controversial candidate, and the polls had shown, well, we talked about ticket splitting, where perhaps the vote for the presidency might be different than the vote down ballot. This perhaps will be an indication of that. Josh Stein, the winner of the governor's race in North Carolina. Just a brief word about this controversial lieutenant governor candidate. You both are jumping to tell me who wants to take
Let me just say one small thing, which is this, because Kristen will get into, I think, how controversial this Republican gubernatorial candidate was. But just remember the ticket splitting piece. This is a state that has ticket split president, governor before. That's it, right? So this, I think,
they have a Democratic governor right now.
That's exactly right. So if somebody's looking at this going, well, the Democratic governor won in North Carolina, doesn't that mean maybe that Vice President Harris is a lock? It does not. And just to throw that out there, this is a state that where Republicans know how to check a Republican for president and a Democrat for governor.
But this was a campaign on Mark Robinson's behalf. It was beset by problems.
Beset by problems because he was determined that he posted some highly controversial comments on an adult website. And so the backlash was massive. This result was expected. The question is, that was, by the way, one of the controversies. I'm giving you the biggest one. The question is, will he drag down support for former President Trump? We don't know the answer, but we do know that in 2020, President Biden was not able to win this state because there was, in part, it's believed, a controversial Democratic candidate for Senate. And that did sink his chances. Now, just to zoom out a little bit, a Democrat hasn't won the state of North Carolina since 2008, when Barack Obama did it. Trump added 3 campaign stops in these closing days of the race.
But the whole weekend there, 3 days straight.
How important this state is to his path.
Also a sense that it might have been slipping away and trying to shore up.
Absolutely.
North Carolina was very, very tight in 2022. Trump won it, but it was right up there in terms of narrow margins.
Which is and it's a good reminder that even if the electoral vote count ultimately has a pretty wide gap, these margins can be very tight, and those electoral votes, listen, they all go to the winner, right? So that's what matters here in a state like North Carolina.
Well, we already talked to Garrett Haake, who was in West Palm at Trump headquarters. Let's go over to Peter Alexander. He's at the Harris headquarters in Washington.
Illinois, in Kansas, or blue right now.
Hey, Savannah, you just heard from Garrett a moment ago talking about how Donald Trump's team seems to be satisfied that he is doing a bit better with those Black and Latino voters right now. Similarly, the Harris campaign feels good that she is outperforming with white voters over Joe Biden's performance with them in some of our early exit poll indications in parts of the country right now. One thing they're keeping an eye on. Another thing I'm hearing from senior officials within the campaign as they get ready to start the program here is that they're seeing really good enthusiasm among those youngest voters, those college students in particular right now. They're talking about long lines.
Let me do this to start as far as Star Spangled Banner.
I'll give it back to you with respect to our country. Then we'll come
passionate about voting because the younger generation.
All right, Peter, that is Harris headquarters in Washington, D.C. We've got Tom Yamas over at the big board.
We're talking Georgia, right? Because it is so close. A reminder here, we're talking about Democrats feeling a little hopeful in North Carolina, Republicans feeling a little better about Georgia. If they swap, right, if Democrats win North Carolina and Republicans win Georgia, they're both seeing like 4 votes. We're back to square one where we were in 2020. Let's talk about Georgia tonight, because what we're seeing is both candidates are overperforming, so it's going to be a nail biter. Remember, in 2020, it came down to about 12,000 votes, a little under that. Let's start in Atlanta, the metro region. Cobb County, we have 57% of the vote in. And let's see how Biden did, 56%. This is actually, Cobb County tells the story of the Atlanta metro region. Newt Gingrich represented Cobb County, and look how Democrats have been able to run up the score. From Romney in 2012, Clinton flips it, and look how they're growing the margins. And tonight, that's exactly what Kamala Harris is doing. She's growing the margins in Cobb County. Let's go around. Let's see what we have in Fulton. Fulton, 53%. Let's see how that compares to Biden, 72. She's holding her own around the Atlanta metro region. Let's see over here. Gwinnett, we only have about 1% in, not really worth a discussion there. Clayton County, 70% in, slightly overperforming Biden. That's pretty good. We'll keep moving. Henry County, 1% in. This is one of those swing counties we can talk about. 1% in. I don't know how much we're going to be able to say there. Rockdale County, again, those Atlanta suburbs, 77% of the vote in. She's overperforming there. Okay, that's Harris. That's the Democrats. Let's go to these rural regions. Rabun, 95% in. Trump at 78 in 2020. He's at 78 right now. You can see he's holding his marks. Union County, a little bit lower, but again, he's around the 80% mark where he should be, and overperforming in White County. Again, those are the rural counties. Let's go to Georgia's Black Belt, where they have counties with lots of African-American voters. Here in Doherty, this is about 70% African-American here, slightly overperforming Biden. So again, guys, what I'm trying to say here is that right now, it's very similar to what we saw in 2020. Trump seems to be hitting his marks where he was in the rural counties. In those African-American counties and around the Atlanta region, Democrats are hitting those marks. It's going to be very close. It's one of the reasons why when we click on Georgia right here, it is literally just too close to call, guys.
All right, Tom, we got a lot ahead here. We're going to take a break, and then another state closing its polls. Which candidate will it bring closer to those crucial 270 electoral votes? We will be right back.
I believe. Or we're going to a commercial break.
Hank used to suffer from what felt like a cold and flu medicine hangover in the morning. Hank, switch to Mucinex Night Shift to relieve your cold and flu symptoms. Uh-oh. Both help you get to sleep. Mucinex is uniquely formulated to leave your system faster so you wake up ready to go. Going to work, Rocky?
I feel like with this live stream, I'm probably not going to alienate a lot of my audience because I'm not really talking about what I want to happen. I'm mainly looking at all this stuff from an objective standpoint. If my personal opinions like, get involved, I'll say something, but I don't really feel like I really need to talk about them right now because it's not really. I'm just worried. I'm just like focused on who's winning in these states.
24/7 monitoring that acts on an alarm in 5 seconds to help stop crime in real time.
Oh, Harris. I think Harris won Connecticut and Rhode Island.
Plus no contracts. Ever.
Maybe Simply Safe and I could work together.
NBC didn't mention that, but I think
Scaredy cat.
There's no safe like Simply Safe.
I'm not gonna confirm it.
She's shopping for a used car, but she doesn't know that
until
nearly half of
NBC
them have been in an accident.
Harris won Rhode Island and Connecticut.
Impact
Two very
so she
tiny
doesn't
states.
have to overpay. Unpause. Whoa,
This is cool.
I wonder how long it would take to like drive through Rhode
20
Island
seconds a week.
because Rhode Island is like that
20%
tiny.
of your weight in a year with diet and exercise.
Well, on the map it's tiny. In
That's
person
the
it's probably
power
like
of
not
GLP-1s
super
through
tiny, but it's probably tiny in
Connect with
something
the
like
provider
Texas.
today
Texas is huge.
road.co/20.
Yeah.
Some things that work better together, like your workplace benefits and retirement savings. Voya provides tools that help you make the right investment and benefit choices so you can reach today's financial goals and look forward to a more confident future.
Voya, well planned, well invested, well protected.
More Americans turn to NBC News than any other news organization.
8:20 in the east, 5:20 in the west. We've got some major battlegrounds close their polls, and the votes are being counted as we speak. That's the road to 270, filling out a bit with some predictable wins and losses in this country. But let's go to the battlegrounds. Virginia is too early to call, just 33% of the vote in. We'll continue to watch it. Ohio. The polls have closed there. It is too early to call, although that once battleground is now more a reliable red state. We'll see how that shakes out. Pennsylvania, stop me if you've heard Pennsylvania very much during this campaign season. It may on the Commonwealth, too early to call there. And in Georgia, we have characterized this as too close to call. So we are about halfway through the vote counting there, 50% in. And though you see that margin, depending on where the votes are coming from, it is our expectation that right now, this vote in Georgia's 16 electoral votes, just too close to call.
All right, let's go over to Hallie Jackson with some new exit polling information on the gender gap.
So this has been a storyline we're talking about all night, right? We say it, Savannah, Lester, you both said it, the battle of the sexes, men versus women. It gets a little bit more complicated at that, but let's start with the gender gap nationally here. And you can see it absolutely still exists. So these are our exit polls nationally based on gender. You can see, obviously, this is just the vote here. Women, 53%, 47% men. Typically what we might see when you get into vote break, I'm going to ask our team to pull that up. You are seeing that more women are backing Vice President Harris. More men are backing former President Trump. More women, 55% for Harris, Trump 43%. We'll go to men, and you'll see it flips, right? That red slice of the pie gets a little bit bigger for Donald Trump when it comes to men nationally, and we'll pull that up so you can see it. The other piece of this, though, there's more to it, right? And when you get a little bit deeper in race and education, that is where this gets really key. And for that, you look at white college-educated women. We've been talking about this demographic a lot here in some of these key swing states. She is doing better with white college-educated women. Donald Trump is doing better with non-college educated white women, and that is another piece of the gender gap dynamic that's at play here.
Well, actually, we have a historic gender gap potentially, and we have a historic education gap potentially. And I want to bring in our panel, we've got Sarah Fagan, who is here. She was a veteran of the Bush White House, George W. Bush, the political director there, and Senator Claire McCaskill of the great state of Missouri that was once a swing state as well. You were a Democratic senator. Way back when. So we've talked a lot about the gender gap, but I think the education gap is key here too. When you hear what Hallie says, Senator, what's your take?
I think, we have so many divides at this point. We have urban, rural. We have college educated, non-college educated. But the big one this election are women and men. And yes, there is a difference between college educated women and non-college educated women. But the support for Harris is so big among college educated women. And the key in this election, I think, is are they going to drag their husbands, their sons, their uncles with them over to the Trump side, because these are my peeps,
Are
right?
those the shy Harris voters?
College-educated older women.
Yes.
You know, I live in that place.
Is this the battle of the sexes, or is that being overplayed?
Well, I do think that college-educated women are a critical, if not the critical voting bloc in this election. And, you know, Hallie, you pointed out that according to the exit polls, it's 53% of the electorate. In 2020, it was 52. Now, 1 point doesn't seem like a lot, but, you know, if Kamala Harris drives up her results among women in these close contests like Georgia and Pennsylvania, like that could be a deciding factor.
You know, I can't believe we haven't actually talked about it yet tonight. Reproductive rights. This is the first presidential election post-Dobbs, the decision that overturned Roe versus Wade. We've seen the potency of that issue. Abortion rights measures have passed every time they've been on the ballot since the Dobbs decision, but we haven't yet had a presidential election. Do you think that issue still has its potency and is a weak spot for Republicans?
I think it has its potency for sure. It definitely cuts both ways, meaning, you know, you see about 10% of the electorate on both sides of the issue for whom that is the most important issue. But there's no question among younger voters, especially younger women, that's an issue that is driving them out. And so the question is, you know, really, is that the main issue they're voting on, or is that one of many issues they're voting on?
Yeah, and I think, frankly, when we look at this, if Kamala Harris wins the presidency, we're going to talk a lot about how the women got her there, but I don't think we should ignore the fact that college students are playing a big role today. The lines, the overperformance at college campuses right now, whether you're in North Carolina or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Nevada, on the ground, I've talked to the team that's running the ground game in all of these states. They have never seen this kind of response on college campuses. So we may have a divide there between kids in college that are voting age and kids who aren't in college that are voting.
Is that playing out just in a few states or across all states?
In all of the states, they're exceeding their model on how many people are voting at these college at places that are primarily college.
How is this?
You can put up the Florida abortion ban. Remember, there are 10 states with abortion on the ballot tonight. We can show you how Florida Amendment 4. This, by the way, requires a 60% to reach the 60% level. So right now, not there yet. We're not making a call, but that's.
It's been interesting to see these ballot measures. We have one in Florida. You mentioned there's abortions on the ballot literally in 10 states, 2 of them battlegrounds, Nevada and Arizona.
Yeah, I think I'm going to end this live stream.
Michigan, for example, had abortion on the ballot 2 years ago, lifted Democrats' prospects in Michigan. Now, is there a question in your mind, Senator McCaskill, whether or not Democrats who might have been motivated to go to the polls on the abortion issue feel like, oh, well, it's already taken care of. People kind of the middle thing. I can vote for Trump even because I think I've already taken care of this abortion question with regard to the ballot measure in a battleground like Michigan.
I don't know. I
I'm still going to be watching
ProPublica has done such an amazing job of publicizing deaths to women because of Trump really extreme abortion bans that are in many, many states. And Texas is a battleground state, but there's a Senate race out there that I've got half an eye on tonight. And I think when you have women dying who want to have the children, who are